In my humble opinion, I think that this part here is probably the most overlooked, neglected part on the entire Airmatic suspension system on these older Mercedes-Benzes. I have this W220 S500 behind me here, and it had a very slow leak. Very, very slowly. We're talking like a couple days. Now, I'm sure any of you who've had an Airmatic suspension car and have had this problem, you can go on the forums and people will tell you, well, replace the top of the struts, or do this, or do that. And maybe you've gone out and spent who knows how many dollars and you replaced all four of your struts. You did the leak test, you sprayed soap all over the place to high heaven, and you can't see any bubbles anywhere, and still your Airmatic suspension car goes overnight, or maybe over 3 or 4 days. So at some point, you're going to have to consider this part right here. Now the problem is sometimes even running diagnostics will not show you that this is a problem because it could be intermittent. Sometimes it might be fine, sometimes it might not be fine. I've actually taken an old one, the one I removed from this car, and I've opened it up. And when you see inside it, you'll see why they failed, particularly when they get real old. I should point out that these are not designed to take apart in service. I literally destroyed this getting it apart. So don't think that, oh wow, I can just take this apart and clean it and put it back together. No, that's not going to work. But watch this. I get this top off. Look at the valves and look at the O-rings. You can see, you got an O-ring there and you got an O-ring there. And if you look down in here, you can actually see some corrosion forming. See the corrosion forming around that area where the O-ring seats? That's where the little leaks are going to come from. They're either going to come from these O-rings deteriorating or the seats and the aluminum parts. If you get any moisture in here, maybe you're in a high salt environment back in the Midwest or East Coast, these probably won't last as long. You've got to really be careful. You can see how the corrosion has started to come in along the sides here, and then of course it really ate up that edge there. This will give you a good example what I mean by intermittent. Let's say you've got a situation where it started to corrode or one of the O-rings has started to deteriorate. Maybe sometimes it will seat when it opens or closes. And other times it won't. These are moving in there, directing air to the different struts when they need it. And it may not seat properly when it shuts down, and then all of a sudden you wake up the next morning and there's a leak. So you go to drive the car, and for 2 weeks it's fine. If you have that kind of situation, you really want to start thinking about this level control valve. Now, as far as other aspects of the Airmatic system, I've got some videos on my website about changing the struts and changing the compressor pump and so on. But I wanted to shoot this video so you're aware of this part and understand why I think it's probably one of the most neglected parts in the entire system. And suddenly, right after replacing struts, these will start to leak internally. We're not talking about external leaks here. So you're going to have to think about this when you go to repair an older Airmatic suspension car. Now you say, well, Kent, you can fix it yourself, so that's different. Well, I want to try to encourage you to learn how to fix yourself. It's not rocket science, and you can save, I'm talking thousands. You might even save $5,000. Because if you take this into a dealer and say, fix my Airmatic suspension, they're not going to piece it. Let's say they find a leak in one of the struts. Well, if they replace that strut and the other strut starts leaking, which is often the case because of age, you're going to come back and you're going to complain to the service center or the dealer or whoever fixed it and say, oh, you didn't fix it. What's the deal here? And you're going to complain. So on these older cars, most mechanics, even independent mechanics, say if you want this done right, you're going to have to replace all the struts, the compressor. They may or may not mention the leveling valve. So just a word to the wise, if you do it yourself, you have then the option to do some progressive maintenance on it. Let's say you locate a leak in one of the front struts. You can actually hear it leaking. So you replace the struts and see what happens. Maybe that's it, but just be aware, if you're going to be working on your own older Mercedes Airmatic suspension car, I just want to recommend think about this level control valve, all right? I just have to do a follow-up on the replacement of that level control valve in this S500. It's been 2 weeks since I replaced the valve, and I don't have one leak, not even the slightest leak. The pump never comes on anymore, And I've put about 500 miles on the car, including a couple trips up into the mountains on really windy roads. And you know, I was surprised that replacing that valve actually improved the performance and handling of this car. It's very subtle, but I noticed on really tight cornering now, there's less body roll. It's quicker to respond. And even my wife Linda, when she was riding with me on one of these trips, she says, hey, this car feels smoother. She was able to feel a little bit difference as we went around the corners and also over some really rough roads. It seemed like the suspension was much more responsive. And she's driven in these Mercedes enough to be able to say, oh yeah, this one really feels good now. I'm really happy. I mean, I couldn't be happier. You probably know by now I am already addicted to air suspension cars. Right behind me is a new arrival. It's a 300 SEL 4.5 with the early air suspension system. And of course, I've currently got it blocked up because it has a leak. So that's my next challenge. But I want you to know I've completed 3 extensive on-demand videos concerning the Airmatic suspension on this car, and these videos relate to other models as well with Airmatic. One of them covers replacing the struts, troubleshooting the pump, replacing the pump, and all the things related to strut replacement and some of the problems you may run into. The other video is searching for leaks, going through the whole process of trying to find a leak on these Airmatic systems can really drive you crazy. And if you follow a systematic approach, you're going to be much more likely to find the leak, and you're not going to have to spend money that you don't have to, because remember, a shop may decide just to replace everything if there's a leak, and it may be something very simple. And then finally, I just completed the video on installing that level control valve. I want to mention again, it's not rocket science, but there are some things you have to be really careful about when you do this procedure. So if you're interested in those videos, they're available on my website. During the month of September 2017, I'll be putting them on sale as a package of all 3 videos. So if you're interested, I hope you will find those helpful in troubleshooting and repairing the leaks in your own Airmatic suspension Mercedes.